Tell us about this new suite of products. You're trying to help companies answer some really complex questions like, is it safe to return to work? How exactly do these products work?
Well, Emily, this has been such a challenging time for all of us. We have really had our hearts with everyone who's been going through such difficulties during this crisis. Even 50 of our own employees have had the virus, and it's really anchored us into what we can do for others. And that's really started in this first phase. And I guess I should say, we see this in three phases. The first phase is the first 90 days, the crisis phase. Then we're going to move to phase two, which is what we're heading towards right now. It's when we're going to reopen. And I'll tell you that in the first phase, we really responded with acquiring more than 60 million PPE for more than 200 hospitals all over the world. We've also delivered more than 6,000 implementations of Salesforce to organizations who have badly needed to manage critical new information. But one thing that we really learned is that some of those organizations, like the state of Rhode Island, they were doing amazing things where they were coupling their testing with contact tracing. And then we realized we were going to need to provide that to all of our customers, which is why we're introducing today something to help us get into phase two, WorkComm, to help us to reopen safely.
So how exactly does WorkComm work? And is this something that you think customers are really going to pay for right now when they're trying to conserve cash?
Well, I'll tell you that when we get back to work and we get back into our offices, the environment will be very different than when we left. We're going to be using that PPE in the office. We're going to have masks. We're going to be using social distancing in the office as well. We'll be checking employees for fever before they get into our buildings, but we'll also be using information technology to help us to manage all of this data. You're going to need things like a command center to help you manage your employees and their interactions with the virus. The virus is still going to be out there in phase two. We'll have to be paying attention to if those employees become positive with an infection, what other employees have they been around so that we can contact those employees and tell them, hey, you've been with someone who's had a positive infection. That's called contact tracing. You're going to have to do workforce triage. You're going to have to do shift scheduling so that if one shift does end up with the virus, you still have your other shift that you can bring in. And all of these things need to be managed in a way that we haven't before. And this is going to be critical to reopening safely.
So I know you're modeling this out, Mark. What is your outlook on how long the economic downturn lasts? And what does that mean for Salesforce? How long do you believe this contraction will go on?
Well, I'm not an economist, Emily, but and I'll tell you, this is my first pandemic. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure this out as I go. I didn't know what PPE was 90 days ago. Now, we've done everything we can to make sure that our hospitals are well equipped. And that's also why we built this suite of software, because we believe that this is important going forward. It's why we're going to have a chief health officer at Salesforce for the first time, because I don't know how we can manage a large corporation around the world without it. When we look at the economic environment, are we in a recessionary environment? Are we in a depressionary environment? We know we're going to be in one of the most severe economic environments that we've ever been in as a company. And we're taking actions now to make sure that we can be successful, but also that our customers can also be successful in an environment like this.
What's your assessment of how the Trump administration has handled the crisis, and what do you think still needs to be done?
Well, it's hard for me to opine exactly on a government response. I think mostly because I have a lot of empathy for the situation and as I said, this is my first pandemic. And I know not just for our government, but for a lot of other governments around the world, it is their first pandemic. For those who have been through pandemics before, like some of these amazing Asian countries where we also have offices like South Korea or Taiwan or Japan, they've done a much better job because this is not their first time at this. And let me give you an example. In South Korea, we already have our employees going back and making sales calls with customers. It's a safe environment. And on May 11th in South Korea, we will reopen our offices. They're ahead of us. They've done a great job. They're modeling for us here in the United States how to be successful in the future. And I'm confident as we have our second or third pandemic, I'm sure we'll do a lot better than we did with our first one.
Now, Marc, you've obviously been incredibly active on the PPE front, which has been very impressive. And you've also called on other companies to make a 90-day no layoffs pledge, which you made yourself. But what happens after 90 days, given that this has now become so much more severe economically? Can you re-up that commitment, or do you think that Salesforce might have some layoffs of its own?
Well, Emily, when this first started and we said this is going to be 3 phases, and the first phase is going to be this 90-day crisis, which we're now getting ready to exit, we really called out and said, let's not lay off anyone in the first 90 days. Now, of course, that is difficult for a lot of companies to do, but a lot of companies followed us. I was surprised and have made their own 90-day pledges. It's amazing. So now we have the ability to come back to our offices fully intact as an organization. That's extremely important to us, and I think for others. For those people who have let go of people or who are experiencing a need now to rehire, I hope that the government in this second phase gives companies incentives to rehire aggressively. I think that will be extremely important to make sure the second phase is successful.
Going into this, Marc, you've been very outspoken about big tech and Facebook in particular. You've been very critical of Facebook, and obviously Washington has had its eyes on big tech. There's this discussion about whether this pandemic is actually going to make some of the biggest tech companies stronger. And I wonder if that's something you're concerned about, that big tech could become even more powerful as a result of the crisis.
Well, Emily, I think it is so important that every company is doing what they can to improve the state of the world with their organization. And when you're the CEO of a company, I think that you have to ask, what am I doing to improve the world for my customers, both commercially and philanthropically? And that's how we try to act at Salesforce. What we have seen is with other companies, and specifically in social media, like you're mentioning, and I think with this virus situation, you've seen this with the spread of misinformation or giving people poor health information. It's just unacceptable. And I was encouraged when I saw several of these organizations pull back and get more aggressive to make sure that the information that's getting out to people was true, because you cannot be giving people the wrong health information. This is where the government must step in and regulate these social media companies and hold them accountable for truth. They should be accountable to saying what is true.
So let's talk about then what's next for Salesforce. I mean, some of your customers are like Marriott and companies that are really, really struggling right now. We're already seeing a wave of renegotiations beginning, whether it's people trying to renegotiate with their landlords or negotiate on their software contracts. Is there anything that Salesforce is doing for the customers who might have difficulty paying you right now?
Well, Emily, I have been the CEO of Salesforce now for more than 2 decades, and this is not my first economic crisis. This is not the first time that I've had to deal with customers in duress. It's really architected into our company from the very beginning, because when we started our company in the early 2000s, we went through a very severe economic situation, and that's when we architected our contracts, our customer relationships, and our cultures, so that when we got into a situation exactly like this, we could operate with our customers with integrity. And that's what we're doing. We will make adjustments, and we will always focus on what can we do to make sure our customers are successful.